Hello and welcome everybody to Space Cowboy Books Online. I'm your host, Jean-Paul Garnier, and this evening we are here with Dianne Dotson. Dianne Dotson dreamed up other worlds and their characters as a child in the 1980s in East Tennessee. She formed her own neighborhood astronomy club before age 10 to educate her friends about the universe. In addition to writing stories, she drew and painted her characters, designed their outrageous space fashions, and created travel guides and glossaries for the worlds that she invented. As an adult, Dianne earned a degree in ecology and evolutionary biology and spent several years working in research. She published Heliopause, book 1 of the Questrison Saga, and its sequels, Ephemeris, Accretion, and her latest novel, Luminiferous, which is book 4. Dianne is also a science writer, VP of Public Relations for Second Cell Bio, Senior Content Manager for Info Resource Inc., short story writer and anthology contributor, watercolorist, and illustrator. She lives with her family. I'm going to pass it over to Dianne to read some excerpts from some of her books, and then we will move into the interview segment of the event. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and you'll also find in the chat links to where you can learn more about Dianne and her books. Over to you, Dianne.
Thank you, John Paul, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm going to first read from the first book, an excerpt, and then I will read part of the second book. The first book is Heliopause, the first book of the Questrison Saga. I'm going to read from a chapter called Silver and Purple. This is chapter 6. This is when things really start to heat up, and I would like to emphasize that. Within 1 hour, Forrester bounced between anxiety and euphoria. The latter took over at last, to the point he kept smashing into things in his mid-deck office. Not that there were many things to smash into. After the 5th time swinging his arms around like a windmill, his elbow and a lamp collided. He ogled in amazed shock at a developing bruise on his right bicep. But exhilaration coursed through him, endangering anything not anchored down in his office. His shin met his desk corner and he barely noticed. His ears rang and his eyes darted, and he caught himself flexing in his porthole reflection. Still got it, he glibly thought before he stepped backward and tripped over his own shoe. Undaunted, he played music, finished his work, devoured his snack bar, and ran in place once back at his own quarters. Eventually, he settled into stretching. He'd ridden high on a sense of purpose and action, such as he hadn't in years, but now he must calm down. By this time, it was late in the afternoon. His shift over, Forrester decided on a trip to the bar. He threw off the jumper, donned pants, and was pulling a shirt over his head when he noticed the diamond on his forearm. It had turned silver again. Forrester swiveled around, half expecting Ephron to appear. I mean, why wouldn't he? He would totally do that. Of this, Forrester was convinced. A quick search revealed no Ephron, but the silver diamond shone. Nonetheless, a deep blush worked its way up his back, and he watched in his mirror as it erupted in splotches on his face. Is he watching me? He had worked out the possibility when a stabbing pain ran down his head and through his jaw. He approached the porthole window and spotted tiny lights far from the station. It's happening again. He watched them, but his migraine had begun. He fumbled for his dots and swabbed one on his tongue. He knew what to expect, and soon enough, the shimmering aura crept through his vision. But he still watched the lights closely. He eyed the diamond on his arm. Are you seeing this? He whispered. He felt like he was talking to a tattoo, but his urgency and his pain overcame any embarrassment. Then his door chimed. He opened it and said, oh, good. And then he realized he was staring at Gibbons. Gibbons stood with hands on his hips, his face flushed, and he smiled, but the smile seemed forced. Gibbons, Forrester exclaimed, and his friend nodded. Come in. Forrester, I've not got much time. Have to meet someone at dinner. Gibbons huffed, and he settled himself in a chair. Where have you been? Forrester blurted. I didn't see you at the announcement. Oh, I was there, Gibbons assured him, fussing over the tea Forrester handed him. Big crowd, you know. Pity about Spears. Yes, Forrester replied flatly, staring at him. Not sure what to say, he asked. Any updates? Not that I'm aware of. Sorry, but that's not why I'm here. Are you all right? You look pale. Forrester drew his fingers along his forearm. The silver diamond had vanished. He rubbed his temples. Another headache. Ah, just in time. Veronica alerted me to new data. As Gibbons took a long draw of tea, he avoided Forrester's gaze. Did she? Forrester asked, trying not to wince. Yes, want to look after dinner? Sure. Good. Gibbons then stood and gave Forster's shoulder a slap. Feel better, good man. I'll see you around 8. Okay, replied Forster, and Gibbons puffed himself up and left the room. Forster leaned just out of sight from the door and watched him go. Gibbons had headed off the hall and was leaving the deck. Forster had just gone in to grab a vest when his door chimed again. Ephraim, he cried, and he saw the silver diamond appear. Ephraim stood staring down at the diamond inscrutably. Ah, good. It works, he said crisply. I guess. Were you able to record anything? I was. Ephraim gave a funny twitch with his hands, as Forster had seen him do earlier, like he's reaching for a coat or something. Forster thought, can we talk here? I'll have an update, Ephraim said in a hushed voice. Forster gestured, and Ephraim entered the room. Forster watched as he made his way in a long stride to the porthole and gazed out. The lights are gone. Yes. Forster looked. No lights. What did Gibbons want? Ephraim demanded. He knows about the lights, Forster confessed, his eyes avoiding the men. I suspected as much. So has he deciphered the signals? Some of it, I guess, through his AI. Ephraim smirked. Ah, yes. I am aware of her. Forster raised his eyebrows. He watched Ephraim's smile spread. Then Ephraim noticed Forster's pallor. Another headache? Yes. Ephraim then reached for the amethyst pendant on his chest. Here, he said, and he pulled the gem up and touched Forster's temple with it. The oddness of the action threw Forster for a moment, and he had just enough time to say, the pain's gone, when Ephraim withdrew the stone and pulled Forster over to his desk. I need to show you something, he said, and he brought up Forster's screen. An image appeared and Forster cried out. It was Spears. Spears, his friend, who had been hale and blustering and jolly and more full of life and vigor than anyone else. This image now in front of him could not be Spears. Forster refused to accept it. Whoever this was, curled into a unnatural shape, his arms clenched in fists in front of his face. This was not Spears. This man, whose face seemed carved in a frozen and incredible pain, screamed in silence, a man warped by and trapped in agony. What is this? Cried Forster. That's Spears. Yes, it is. Don't look away. Ephraim grabbed him and stood him in front of the screen. Look, take a good long look. Forster's heart hammered in fear and revulsion, yet he did as he was told. Is he dead? As I said before, he is not. How are we seeing this? I have ways, said Ephraim. Forster covered his nose and mouth and peered over his fingers. Why show me? Ephraim bent to face Forster at eye level, within centimeters, and hissed, you need to see this. You need to understand. This is what has happened to your friend. He is trapped in suffering, and he is beyond our reach. If he could choose, he would wish to die. Everyone on this station is at risk. This could happen to all of us. How? Not Ariel. This is what I'm unsure of, Forster. I don't want this to be true, but we must take precautions. Forster, Gibbons knows this. What? Forster gasped. Why would he be so interested in these signals of yours? Why involve his Veronica? Yes, I do know her name as well, Ephraim nodded. In fact, I feel better learning more about this Veronica. That may be one weakness, and we should use it. Stop right there. What in the hell are you talking about? And then Forster remembered the first code translation and went cold. Changed me, feared me. Ephraim saw Forster's face fall. What? Forster snapped. Can't you read minds? And Ephraim actually tilted his shiny head back and guffawed. Oh, Forster, I'm not that skilled, I'm afraid. Wouldn't want to be. I'm just asking. The signal, the code, Gibbons, Veronica translated, it said, changed me, feared me. Ephraim inhaled sharply, and that one gesture shook Forster to his core. Oh shit, what now? It's Ariel, it has to be, Ephraim said quickly. He loped to the door. I need to go. Are you telling Meredith? Forster asked. They stared at each other. Not yet. I have something I need to do. And Ephraim stopped and turned back. Forster, take a break. You've more than earned it. I'll be in touch. The door shut. Forster didn't need to be told twice. He combed his hair and left for the bar. So that is a reading from the first book, Heliopause, and I'm going to jump to the second book, Ephemeris, which has a different central character, Galatea. whereas Forster is the main character of Hewlett Falls. And in Ephemeris, we're going to start with chapter 11. This is Ephemeris. As you can see, it's rather more exotic. Chapter 11, The Abyss. Gala awoke to Ariadne's hologram face above her. She shrieked and sat bolt upright. Time to get up, his face told her. He wore a wicked smirk. Could you please not wake me like that? Gala asked. Well, you weren't answering and it was effective, yes, said Ariadne. When you start answering your alarm, I'll stop waking you like this. She moaned and slid back under the covers. Can I just have breakfast in here? You may, Ariadne answered, but it's time to examine that device. Head down in your craft. I'll unshield it for you. Gala hastily readied for her work. She ate the sugared bun and fruit that suddenly appeared on her nightstand. She donned a jumpsuit that phosphoresced and fled to the bay. She loved this. Ariadne might think her a dreadful pilot, but she adored how it felt. She could scarcely wait to begin, even if it took some time and effort to get her hair to behave for the helmet. She would shove the curling tendrils in, and out they would spring again. She jumped onto the little survey craft and shot out of the floating fortress and dropped rapidly. Ariadne, watching from his balcony, felt like covering his eyes. I should not be worrying about her, but it's difficult not to. She pulled up just before skimming the surface. Ariadne had turned away, having covered his face with his hands, and then sped upward with a jolly whoop. She headed straight into the wind, loving the feeling of it sweeping away any uncomfortable thoughts, just simple motion at high speed. She wove around the hills and headed for the pit. Gala soon found it and flew all around it before landing near its rim. She took off her helmet and set it on the seat of her survey craft. She peered over the edge and recoiled. There was something about this gaping thing that seemed unsettling to her. I've made it, she said to her wrist communicator. Good, said a relieved Ariadne. Now, look for footholds and make your way down. Take note of everything you see. Got it, said Gala. Be careful, Ariadne told her. Gala slinked down the footholds. She ventured farther down for several minutes. The air temperature seemed cool, like a cave. It smelled metallic, like rusted machinery. Deep into the holes, she could just see dim red lights. The light emanating from her glowing clothing did not reach the other side of the pit, so she was grateful for the red lamps. She carefully stepped farther down again. It was silent, except for a whistling breeze. The blackness of that pit unnerved her, even with the lights. She shuffled her feet on a solid surface. She let out a sigh. I've reached a platform, she said aloud. Ariadne's voice said, well done. Now hold steady and calm yourself. Gala felt, but could not see the edges of the platform. She sat with her legs crossed and waited. Gradually, a humming sounded and a series of whooshing noises came from somewhere in the pit. Something's happening, she whispered. Don't move until after the platform stops, Ariadne told her. You'll be beyond communication range soon due to interference. Proceed and be cautious. The platform suddenly shot down into the darkness. Gala had no time to shriek in surprise. She sat perfectly still, her hair blown upward from the speed of descent. Quaking, she watched the disk of sky above her become smaller and smaller. She eyed the wall of the pit, its red lights streaming in a vertical blur, and then clack, the platform stopped. I stopped, she breathed, no answer. She exhaled shakily. Ariadne could no longer hear her. She turned and found a panel slid open behind her, taller than Ariadne and thinner. More dim light shone beyond. Gala entered the door and found a long hallway. The panel slid shut behind her. She blinked. The light grew brighter. Soon she could see well enough to orient herself. Before her were other doors, all opening onto various passageways that branched downward. She moved to one at her left and began walking down its hall. She traveled for some time along the metallic halls, looking for anything interesting. No other doors and no markings were visible, even after nearly an hour of searching. There was, however, a rhythmic sort of humming, soft and barely perceptible to Gala. And while she had been accustomed to many machines and their sounds on Dimitron, this humming heightened her anxiety. I don't like this place, she thought as she walked. I don't know how Ariadne explored this pit all by himself. There's something not right about it. For an awful moment, her thoughts returned to the dream she had had about Ariadne and the beings with the great dark eyes. She hated thinking of that. She began obsessing about those eyes, staring coldly, unflinching. The humming, thumping rang in her ears, and she began to realize she was afraid. She had stopped, but now she began walking again, thinking, what is this place? What is it for? Who built it? And why would there be several of these on different planets? She had finally staved off some of her anxiety about it all when she heard a hideous clanging and scraping sound. She twitched where she stood. There's something in here, she thought frantically. She wanted to run back out to the platform and skyrocket out of there. A vibration flowed through the floor, followed by a deep, low octave hum. The clanging stopped. Gala could see the hallway light up in the distance, revealing a broad space like a courtyard. She decided to walk toward it, She found nothing but empty space and several other doors heading off from the courtyard like spokes of a wheel. The air was still and stagnant in this space. She began to walk toward one of the doors. Then Gala froze. Images entered her mind, things she did not understand. Faces, other planets, fire, clouds. At one point, she saw something that seemed familiar. A great piece of rock, larger than her, split open, lined with violet crystals. Another image showed her a star collapsing, then vanishing suddenly before any ejection of material. She stood transfixed, and the visions kept rolling. In one scene, there was a shadowy place filled with hive-like cells. Another image showed her what looked like a city made of copper. Finally, one image made her clench her arms tightly, a great web with herself caught in it and cabled up as the web enveloped her, pulled her arms and legs far apart, threw her head back and thrust into her mouth, suffocating her. A quiet voice said to her, "You cannot stop us. If we cannot harm you, we will take everything from you. We will feed upon the pain of those you love." She fell to her knees, wheezing. The scraping sound began again. The buzzing and thumping grew. The place was roaring and shaking. She cried out, "Onioti, Ariad," and staggered up. She ran, pounding the metal floor as it pitched and rolled below her. She reached the exit and the door slid open. She nearly missed the small platform and clung to it ferociously while looking back at the door behind her. It had shut. Desperately, she yelled, "Go, go up," and held tight. The platform surged upward, and she gasped in relief at the small light above. As soon as the lift stopped, Gala clambered up the footholds in mad haste and threw herself onto the ground. She covered her face with her hands and curled into a ball, shaking. "Gala!" cried a voice. "Ariad," she moaned. She felt hands lifting her, holding her steady. "You're safe. Try to stop convulsing," the mage told her in a calm voice. She began to remove her hands from her face. It was dusk. When Gala had gone down, it had been morning. She shuddered, and she noticed 3 Indricol standing behind Ariad at a distance. They bowed to her respectfully. She recognized them from her first harvesting trip. Ariad murmured an incantation to prevent Gala from curling back up. He put an arm around her and walked her toward the Indricol. They looked up at him with frightened expressions. "She will be all right," he told them in their language. "Come along with me. We'll all go back together." They entered Ariad's craft and soon arrived within his keep. Ariad led Gala and the 3 Indricol to her chambers. The mage coaxed her onto her bed, where she turned away from all of them and clutched her covers about her. Ariad turned to the Indricol and spoke to them in whispers. They bowed to the mage and left the chambers. Ariad swept over to Gala and moved her tangled hair from under her head. "Rest now," his voice came soothingly, but she could not hear him. So those are 2 excerpts from both Heliopause and Ephemeris. The adventure continues in Accretion and Luminiferous.
Thank you so much for sharing those excerpts with us, Dianne. And in case you all didn't notice when she held up the books, the cover art is fantastic on all of this series. So what made you gravitate towards writing space opera? And what made you decide to debut with such an epic 4-book series?
Well, it goes back pretty far. I can say truthfully that I'm a lifelong space opera fan. The first movie that I remember seeing in movie theaters was Star Wars in 1977, and I was 3 years old. And I thought Alderaan was Earth getting blown up, there was a walking carpet and a beeping robot and, a giant skeleton of some dragon thing in the desert, and I felt immersed completely in it. I was all in. The story of a farm boy becoming a hero was resonant, and a girl kicking butt out in space. I wanted that. And I wanted a main character like that, except more of her. So I decided eventually, as I started writing as a kid, and I was massively into Star Wars and Star Trek and Alien and Aliens, I started writing at age 13 and actually finished a full novel and its sequel a year later. And my English teacher actually, on my behalf, approached publishing companies at that time. And I was, I was too young really for this to get going. And I decided that I needed to grow up a bit, even though I had such great support. So I kind of set it aside and went on to, high school, eventually university. And then I came back to it again over time and slowly wrote these books. And I actually, when I rewrote them, I wrote ephemeris first. And I got to a certain point in which I thought, I need to tell the story of how these humans got out to where they're at. So that became Heliopause. And I dreamed of the character Forster, in that opening scene where he's just walking down the hall on the soft floors on Mandira Research Station. And it went from there, and I tied everything together. And in Ephemeris, it is a prequel and a sequel. It's sort of prequel, concurrent, and sequel to Heliopause. So I just decided that, I was going to go for it. I had waited my whole life and I was very ready to get this going. It was at a good point in time in which I felt in command of the characters and of my writing and confident enough to do this, although it was still quite scary to get yourself out there and give the story to the world. But I was ready and I have zero regrets. It's just that was my life dream, is to get this story, the Questrison Saga, out in the world.
I'm glad that you did. We have a great question here from Larry in the audience. He says, I appreciate the varying accents you use while reading, and I'm wondering if there are shifts in the language within the text or descriptive passages that make clear the various characters' origin stories.
I don't really get into a whole lot of background for the humans, although I do hint strongly, and I even talk about Meredith being from what used to be the old South of America, old America. So things have changed at the end of the 23rd century. I don't get into the details of exactly what. That's a tale for another time, as Ariad would say. And for Ariad and other characters, like I have distinct voices in my mind. For Forrester is just kind of this average guy, 40 something, down on his luck, crappy relationship history, and I just wanted him to be kind of an every person. And so that's just how I approached him in my head and when I read him, So Ephron is slightly eccentric, dresses like Nikola Tesla. And then, Gibbons is kind of got a British accent. And Guru, one of the characters in the series, is actually of Pacifica descent, Maori descent. So he gets a slight Kiwi twinge, a little bit of difference to that. So that becomes apparent later, I talk a little bit about that, hint at it, but I definitely talk more about his ancestry later and how, his ancestors were the first people who truly did navigate by the stars, we think. So it's fun to just kind of inflect all those things. I wanted Ariad to have a powerful voice that made you think, this guy is a force to be reckoned with. I wanted Gala to be very approachable and kind of naive, which is what she is at first. She has to grow from kind of slightly feral to being a commander in a short period of time. And she has to learn to fit in with humans. She looks like a human, but she isn't one. And she has to fit in with them in order to help save them. So it's just really fun for me. Like one thing I used to do, and I haven't really talked about this much anywhere else, but when I was a kid, I lived in the country and I was the youngest kid by several years. So I felt a lot like an only child. And I would spend a great deal of time out in the woods reenacting multiple scenes from multiple characters' point of view, kind of like Sir Patrick Stewart does in A Christmas Carol. I would switch back and forth between these voices. And so then I would go write them or vice versa. And it was just a lot of fun for me to do that.
I often think that the pleasure of being a science fiction writer, it reminds me of being a child in my cardboard spaceship, and that we get to stick with that as writers, which is so much fun, right?
Yeah.
So how has your degree in science and working in the field of research affected your writing of fiction?
So it's interesting because I was always a nature kid. Like I said, I grew up in the country and I had my own astronomy club. I was obsessed with astronomy and space, but also geology, which is kind of where Gallus Geode comes in later. And I was doing art at the same time. So when it came time in high school, I was like the winning senior portfolio in art. I was doing a lot of artwork and I was strong in English. Everybody assumed I was going to be this writer, right? Or an artist or both. And I swerved and I said, nope, I want to do science because it challenges me in a way that these other things can never do. And I also wanted to help discover things for the first time. And I cared very strongly about ecology and the environment and animals. And so I ended up getting a degree in ecology and evolutionary biology from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And I'm really glad that I did. I ended up doing some post bachelor's work in research labs, some of which were ecology based. And then when I moved to the West Coast, I switched over. There was always a through line of genetics through all this. I always worked in genetics research. And I switched from Seattle, like a genetics pharmacology lab. I moved to clinical research and worked in cancer research for a number of years. So that was a very different line of thinking, but I felt very strongly always through all my science work that I wanted to help people in the planet, you know, in any capacity I could. So when it came back to full circle to the stories, after my first child was born, I began working from home as a science writer, which was perfect because I could be home with my kids and I could write about all manner of science topics. And from that, I sort of started, I already had interlaced, you know, some ecology in my stories over time. But when I was becoming a science writer, I would find some things that kind of inspired me a bit. There's a character in Accretion, the third book in this series, that the structure of his head it looks like a feather star. And I had done a science article on feather stars, which are a kind of animal that look like a fern, you know, that live in the ocean. So, and I wanted this sort of telepathic power, you know, for him to have these appendages that would sway when he was using his power. So I use some science. I don't go completely overboard and get stuck in it. So these novels in this series are not like your hard sci-fi, although there are elements of hard sci-fi. And Mandira Research Station being a good example of sustainability at the far edge of the solar system, which we'll talk about in a minute, I think. So, you know, I have, because this series is science fiction and fantasy, there's intergalactic mages, you know, and things like that. But I am of that kind of belief that, you know, magic is a science that we haven't discovered yet. So, and, you know, Ariad jokes about that from time to time in the books.
Here's another audience question. This one is from Jared. You answered part of his question already about your science background, but also what are your thoughts on the solar punk movement and ecological science fiction?
Oh, I love it. And in fact, I was invited to contribute to an anthology that is solar punk. And it's fantastic. And my story is going to be the final showcase story of the book, which is great. And it's a delightful story. I think everybody's going to love it because it's like a library in space kind of science fiction. And it's got a great hero. And, you know, she's just completely cool. And I think people who love Doctor Who and Star Wars are going to especially love that story. So that's coming out, I think, sometime this year. I love anything to do with solar punk and, you know, but ecology science fiction. One of the reasons, you know, I especially in Luminiferous, I kind of dig into the ecology of a very interesting planet, which a lot of the action takes place on in that book, and the interrelationship between creatures in their environment and the plants, the species interacting with the environment and how it all kind of ties together. And it's just fabulous to me. Like, I want to keep doing it, right? You know, like I'm hoping to revisit both themes in future works. Not all of them maybe because they don't all apply, but I definitely have a lot of things up my sleeve.
And when I ask a question outside of the book about how the books came to be, but then we'll get back to Heliopause. What made you decide to go the self-publishing route with this series? And what have been the strengths and weaknesses of this approach? And do you plan on continuing this method? I ask because I know we have some writers in the audience. I'm a writer myself, and this is a great question for a lot of us that you seem to have navigated well.
Yeah. So when I had finished Heliopause in 2017, and honest to God, the main reason I finished it was my friend Nathan Camp pushed me to do it. Like, he was the only voice encouraged me, you got to finish this, you know, because I was kind of down in the dumps on it and not feeling very supportive. And I needed that push, and that was all it took. And so I finished it and I started to submit it to agents, a lot of agents, literary agents in the publishing world. I knew someone who knew someone, right? And I had an opportunity to do an actual vocal pitch for Heliopause. And the guy loved it. And what I didn't realize at the time was that he was a major Hollywood producer. I just thought he was also a writer. I did not know that he had a massive hit movie and that he was a producer. So he was like, I think this has show potential. And of course I was like super excited, and he read it and he did enjoy it, but he's like, I think you need a little bit more work on it and then it's going to be perfect. So I hired 2 professional editors who had been in the industry for decades, between them and New York publishing. And we worked on it. We got it as polished as we could. I submitted it to agents. I got really close with multiple agents. One of them, who I really loved, she wanted me to kill more people. And I was like, no, that's for one of the later books when I bring out the long knives. So I wasn't, I realized that I had been working on this thing since I was literally a kid. And then I had a powerful ownership of it. And I made a decision one day and I just said, you know what? I'm done querying. I'm going to do it myself. And the reason I decided was because we live in an era in which you can make an excellent independently published book of extraordinary quality that fits on the shelf with any traditionally published book. And I just dug my heels in. I didn't want to compromise on this. I wanted readers to have the best possible books they could have, hence the professional editors and professional cover team, and I'm just really stubborn. Just as a person, I'm incredibly stubborn. But for this series, it was my first baby, so to speak. It has been in my mind now. I'm about to turn 48 this coming weekend, and it has been in my mind since I was 13. So, and actually before then. And I just stuck to my guns and just did it. So now I've come a different way. I'm, I guess, entering the hybrid situation in which I'm in a couple of different anthologies that I did not publish myself. So I'm branching out, but all future work I do, with the exception of anything related to the Questrison Saga, I do plan on submitting to agents. My goal is to get a really good agent and get these traditionally published, because I really want, it's a lot of work. It's so much work to do the promotion, the publication, everything yourself. I don't have a team unless I hire one, and I don't have the money to do that. It is expensive and it's a lot of work. And if that's what you want to do, then I encourage you to do it. But just know going in, it's going to cost you if you want a really good quality book. So
I think a lot of readers aren't aware of just how much work goes into it, and that usually there are large teams.
It's unbelievable. Like I've for years now, just constantly the hustle of running all social media channels, of constantly promoting, trying to get the word out, trying to get people to read it. I've been so lucky that I've been encouraged by, because it's a globally distributed book through Ingram Spark book series, it's everywhere. It's not just on one seller website. You can get it in paperback and ebook from anywhere in the world. And I love that about Ingram Spark. And that was incredibly important to me, because I knew that if I didn't do that, that I wouldn't be able to sell the book in independent bookstores, which I love independent bookstores and I want to support their work. So, I was able to partner with multiple indie bookstores as well as national chains for book events. Like I had Green Apple Books in San Francisco. I had Book Soup in LA had some of my books, Mysterious Galaxy Books, which I adore everyone involved in that store in San Diego. Have had events for every single book through them. And in Tennessee, in my hometown, when I was back for a year, I was able to have Books A Million give me a launch during the pandemic. So it's just an incredible, the amount of work that I put in has paid off, but it has been a lot of work. And, I'm just so grateful for my friends and their support, and anybody who leaves a review on Goodreads or Amazon or Google or wherever you leave it is, to every author, such a treasure. And we thank you so much for that, because that's how, as an indie especially, it helps every author, mind you, not just independent, to leave a review or a star rating. It helps people decide, do I want to read this book or not? And like the more reviews you have, the better judgment they have. They can say, well, it sounds pretty good, I'm going to get it, and those kinds of things just incrementally, propelled me. I also appeared at multiple conventions. I've been on a lot of panels along with big names like Cory Doctorow, and it's just been, I've been really lucky, but at the same time, I want to foster and encourage everybody else who's going to enter the publishing world, no matter what avenue you take. It does really still, even for traditionally published authors, it takes a lot of promotion self-promotion.
It is a tremendous amount of work from every angle. And those are all wonderful bookstores you mentioned. So very cool that you participated with those. So back to the series here. Heliopause takes place at the little explored outer edge of our solar system. What caused you to choose this region of space as the setting for the book?
Well, for one thing, for those who don't know, the Voyager spacecraft that we launched, the two of them, they have now passed beyond the edge of our solar system. They have crossed the heliopause, and that's where the sun, helio meaning sun, pause meaning end, right? That's where it's basically its influence is not as present as it is in the rest of the solar system. At that point, once you're out of the heliopause and out of the heliosphere of the sun, you're in interstellar space. So I loved the fact that, for one thing, this taking place in the 23rd century, it is long enough for us to have developed technology so that we can travel out there, which is pretty far. And then at that same thinking, like, this is a research station, much in the same vein as the International Space Station is preparing us for interplanetary travel. These research stations that receded all around the heliopause, Mandara is just one of them, they're basically preparing us for interstellar travel. And there's a little bit of corporate stuff going on behind the scenes, that there's a little bit of financial investment in that particular station, and other things are happening kind of in the background, some of them quite nefarious. So, but what I also liked about the station being out there was that it had to be sustainable. You can't get to it fast because Earth doesn't have, faster than light travel, in the late 23rd century. I've kept that part realistic for Earth. Emphasis on Earth, okay? Because things get interesting out in the galaxy. But, I just wanted this sort of sustainable system. You couldn't get too fast. So any emergency situation, if you can't take care of yourself, it's going to take a while before the nearest bases in the outer solar system, somebody can get to you. And so the resupply runs that Captain Spears, he helps helm those. There's a lot of remote stuff that doesn't, it's uncrewed, that would come to the station. But I liked that it was out there. I liked that it's not a huge station. It's not like this big miles long thing. It's contained and it's sustainable, and you rely upon, what you can grow and repair and everything yourself there. I really liked that because you rely on each other. You have a team, and even though the station is set up almost like a caste system, where the high, scientists are on the top deck, there's a mix in the mid deck, and there's sort of the grunts and the robots on the bottom deck of, steerage and bays and stuff. I just really like that sort of small contained thing out there alone. And then when something goes bad, it's scary.
I found that to be quite effective in the book. And I love that you chose an area of space that's not necessarily considered exciting because we don't know that much about it or what's out there.
Right.
We're exploring the Kuiper Belt now, but I love that you were able to take this area, this vague area of space, the edge of our solar system, and make it quite an exciting setting for the books. So also in Heliopause, telepathy plays a major role, both between characters and as a possible means of communication with aliens. What made you choose this device over technological solutions?
Well, one thing that I don't really talk a whole lot about in Heliopause, but that is true in this universe I created in the 23rd century, is we've already augmented with technology for some of this capacity, but biological telepaths start to evolve also that are not augmented by tech. And there's two lineages, and so one of them, you're born with it. It's obvious from birth that you're a telepath. Ariel Brandt falls into that category. In terms of Forster, he's latent, and it doesn't start to emerge until his late 40s, and he's triggered by another telepath, and he starts to have these incredible, sort of hallucinatory migraines. He's triggered by the signals out there. So I liked the fact that it was sort of a private thing in a time in which nothing's really private, that you could still think to each other. It creates, though, a situation in which that would either be an advantage or it would be a disadvantage. As it happens with everything that goes down, it's a disadvantage ultimately to be a telepath, and it's if you read the whole series, you'll understand why. So in this case, I just really liked that sort of underlying camaraderie going on, and learning to be a telepath is also something I thought was fascinating, so that you have people who've known how to do it since birth, and a person who's like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Oh my God, like just realizing he's reading thoughts. And there's some regulatory aspects of it with mind send, which is sort of a corporate situation. It's not government. And so they like to keep a tab on anybody who's got any sort of weird power development. It's not necessarily just telepathy, but mind send is, kind of indicative that it's related to mind. So I liked also that, there's a vulnerability to the telepathy aspect, that you're opening yourself up to someone else on a level that is very intimate. And that comes into play with also when something bad happens, how that can affect relationships.
And while Heliopause is definitely a science fiction book, it also has some elements of cosmic horror that I really enjoyed. How do you find a balance when combining these type of subgenre tropes against your space opera setting?
Cosmic horror to me is a long love, and it's something I'm digging more into even as we speak. I love John Carpenter's The Thing. It's in my top 3 movies. Of course, I love Alien and Aliens, but The Thing, to me, I love that sense of paranoia, and there's something you're facing that just does not care about humans at all. And it's something in space, and that's cosmic horror. It's not just like having a bad guy in space. It's having something that does not care about you at all. You are nothing to this entity. You're just another thing to grab onto and collect and absorb and grow from. And that's what's happening with Peos Johan, is that it spit out these little stalks, which were discovered, unfortunately, by telepaths. And one in particular is taken over. So it's a situation where this thing is spreading itself throughout the galaxy and sort of putting feeders out. And in this case, the goal is to try to stop it from taking over the solar system. And that's when trying to keep it contained in Mandira Research System is the goal. And you'll have to read to see what happens next, but it's not gone away. As I hinted in the reading of Ephemeris, there's something out there, and it will take everything that people love from them. Doesn't care. And so what I love about that, though, is just also, I like something not sympathetic to humans. I liked there to be a monster, because everybody, humans, other aliens, robots, everybody is at this thing's mercy if they can't stop it. And I love having that risk. It's a pretty scary risk.
Very cool. Well put. We've got another couple questions here from the audience. We've got a couple here from Jared again. And I'll throw both of these at you and let you take them in any order you want. As a self-published author, how does the fractured state of the ebook market affect you? And do you have advice to give future authors? And he also asks, the 70s featured a lot of great science fiction and fantasy mixes. Are there any that particularly influenced you?
So in order to make sure that everybody could have access to these books, again, choosing Ingram Spark, they publish out to all the different ebook providers. So you can get it through Nook, Kindle, Kobo, Google, Apple, all the formats of ebook out there. And I very much wanted that, because different people have different ways and means of, how they want to read. And a lot of independent bookstores work with Kobo and other things like that, because it doesn't compete with them. And so I didn't have a problem with that, because that's not handled by me. That's distributed through Ingram Spark. It literally is like you upload it and you basically click a button and it's sent, so you gotta make sure everything is really ready, which is terrifying, because you don't, like, that's like an instant proof versus a print book. You can get the proof sent to you, and you can look through it. But the ebook is like, you look through it before you publish it, is all I can say. But the nice thing is, if you have to change anything, it's pretty quick, but it just goes out so quickly. So I didn't really have any problem with that. In terms of the publishing, generally is just, I'm not really sure, like, I don't really have any advice other than to say, make really sure that your print and your copy is as clean as it can possibly be and has been combed through by actual editors, because you will miss so many things. And I had taken this great workshop from someone who ended up being one of my editors. And she said, some people just write something and they slap it on Amazon. Well, I didn't want to do any of those things, right? As I've said. And I also, because I knew that I was like, yeah, I could do that. And I could charge 99 cents for this thing, but that's all I'd ever get for it, because it wouldn't have the quality involved. It wouldn't have the time and all that. And I wouldn't make any money on it whatsoever. So, and at that point, like if you start at that tier, that's all anybody's going to pay for your books. So I would say you have nothing to lose by starting out at a higher tier. If you want to lower it eventually, then you can do that. So that's my 2 cents on that. And I keep the ebook prices steady because it's not related to supply chain issues of paper.
And in the last question there, the science fiction and fantasy mixes in the 70s, anything that sticks out to you?
Well, so the 70s feature as much, but not as quite as much as like 80s fantasy. So in terms of 70s, like you can definitely see that silent running had an influence, especially in Ephemeris, when you meet the star city of Demetron, and it's full of robots. And in the first book, Heliopause, I give a nod to the little robots in silent running with my bots that Forster has that are named for places in Oregon. There's Bandon and Depot. And I really loved having that sort of contained, sustainable environment. I kind of took a little bit from that for Mandira and for Dimetron. So that was definitely a sort of nod to silent running. I also, of course, loved Star Wars. And even, Battlestar Galactica, the original 1970 show. What I liked about that show was that it was just unabashedly just whole hog, go for it all. And I do lean into that a little bit and have a little bit of, glam drama. But there's a lot of 80s and 90s aspects to my books as well. I would say that, I have huge anime influences. Like if you know what Macross Plus is from Robotech, you can see the through line, especially in the later books from that. You can, Heliopause has a decent sprinkling of Dark City, which is one of my all-time favorite movies from the 90s before The Matrix. And I loved the Mighty Orbots cartoon and Transformers and He-Man and She-Ra and Jem and the Holograms. And you could kind of see elements of all those things and a little bit of, Labyrinth and stuff like that sprinkled in, and Legend and those different 80s movies like that. And then definitely there are some hints of The Thing and Alien and Aliens, also 3 of my favorite movies, but also completely unrelated non-science fiction stuff influences, like The Sound of Music. It's, you can kind of tell I'm a Sound of Music fan by some of the relationships in there. And even Anne of Green Gables, there's a little bit of Anne to Gala, like temperamental, stubborn kind of aspect to her character. So there's a little bit of everything sprinkled in.
Truly, truly outrageous. That's the 4th time Jem and the Holograms has come up for me this week. It's something's trying to tell me something.
Yeah.
So will there be more books in the Questrison Saga, or do you plan on working on other series or standalones?
Oh, I'm working on all kinds of things right now. What I am doing, the Questrison Saga, the main story is complete with Luminiferous, but as you can tell when you read them all, there is such a vast trove of characters and worlds and other stories and histories that could be explored. And in fact, that's what I'm doing. I'm writing collections that will be different volumes, and they'll be called the Questry Tales. And so those are going to be a lot of fun. I'm over halfway through with one of them, and it's just so much fun to revisit some of the characters at different points in their lives from the saga, and see what they did or what they will do, and also what's happening in the galaxy at large, because it's a dynamic situation that's changing constantly. So that's for that. And then I have a lot of other unrelated stuff in the works. I have a middle grade dark fantasy that I'm working on. Currently, the thing I hope to finish in the coming weeks is a near future sci-fi thriller novella. And it's close to the finish line. And it's got some elements of cosmic horror to it as well. So I kind of revisit that. I also have a high fantasy story I'm fleshing out, and I have a collection of short stories from Gothic horror to Appalachian short stories to fantasy that will be in that collection. I hope to get that out this year. So that collection and the Questry Tales will be two things I likely indie publish, but everything else I hope to have traditionally published.
So what's next for you aside from what you just mentioned? And are we going to see your illustration work find its way in intersection with your writing?
Well, yeah, so I'm working again on those various projects. I also want to be part of more anthologies because I think that's a lot of fun. I love to have the theme and then run with that theme. So I'm looking at different short story submissions. I've just submitted a short story and some poetry. I don't write that much poetry anymore. I wrote a lot as a teenager and it's quite terrible. But I definitely want to explore more of cosmic horror. I want to explore Gothic horror. I'm dipping more into horror just generally. I've joined the Horror Writers Association, which are wonderful people. And, I'm fleshing out the science fiction realm. And as we spoke about earlier, like I really liked solar punk and I like the ecology stuff and I want to branch out there. And, those are some of the things I have in mind. In terms of illustrations, I'm not sure that will play into anything. I have some children's books in mind that would be picture books that I could maybe do my own illustrations for. It's, I'm so rusty at it because I had switched over from art to science and then writing, and I'm slowly working those brain muscles again, so to speak, and doing more illustration. So I'll say never to that one.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, Dianne, so much for sharing some excerpts from your work and for talking about the work. Thank you to our audience for the wonderful questions. Look forward to reading the rest of the series. Heliopause was fantastic. For those in the audience, there's links in the chat to all those. You can also find those at our online bookstore or any of the bookstores that Dianne mentioned. So thank you so much. If you have any parting thoughts, now would be the time, but it's been a pleasure to get to discuss your work with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who's been on the call.
All right. Until next time.
Thank you. Ad Astra.